fantastic. And we'd love to have you here, Tony. It's been far too long since last time you were here with us. And before we get started with our conversation, I also want to point out that my mother-in-law is going to be tuning in here tonight because she is so curious about CERN and has no idea about it. So we're going to have to start at square one. But before we do, Marty, you feel like doing the chat room tonight, buddy?
I would, bro, if I could see it. There seems to be technical problems.
We got some technical difficulties going on, do we?
I'm in there, Joe. So, JD, you want to jump in, man?
JD, by all means.
If I'm the only one that can see the chat, I've never actually had the honor of doing the chat, and I would absolutely love to do it. So let me be the first here tonight. Thank all of you guys joining us in the chat room at truthfrequencyradio.com. It is so nice to have you guys all along for the ride, and as Joe just pointed out, this is going to be an epic, epic evening of crazy, crazy woo. We have so much to talk about tonight. So the quick shout-out list is going to be as follows. AI, very nice to see you. Amy as well. Aussie as Knack. Bag of Chips, Beer Night, Bumbalina, Crazy Tricky, DJ Pinthers, Down Under DP, Dr. Harry Wiener, I always wonder what his PhD is in. Flying Victor, Jers is in there, Goycat, Harpick, who, one of my favorites from the morning crew on my show, IC Conference, Itherion 275, Mr. Johnny Whistles, Mr. Kevin Baker is in there, Kev T.I. is in there tonight, Mr. Lex, Luther is in the house, Luz Aurora, Lucky Number 1, Lucky Man is in there as well. Man with no name. Been through a desert on the horse with no name once. Marty, the big Martster, in the house as well. Matt D, Meat Dog, Paisley Buddy, good friend of mine as well. Penelope, Red Linky, one of our very favorites. Myself, Robbie D from Tough Talk Thursdays over on KBS. Love having him around. Rusty, Saber FX, Scottish John in the house tonight as well. Man, this is just such a party here. Sid in Beeston, Silverman, quadruple 11, Smug is in there. Spooky Andy of Colorado, that is an awesome name. Sub Rosa 77, Ted Welsh, Tex Rockefeller, the Tinfoil Man, Tiny Clanger, that's another great name. One Senshu. And this one, I can't even pronounce that. I am Joseph Hashafush, and Kevin Nisterman's in there, Seronimus, I like that. Joe Joseph, the one and only. The last one, Han Solo. Stand Tall, the 7, 333. Amnesiac, 83. Evil number 2. Brian, quadruple 8. John Teeter is here, was here. Where is he now? They kill us. Quantum Stushy in the house. Oh, my gosh. Quantum Stushy. He's gone quantum tonight. Mystical Fairy. Chemtrail Viagra. I like that name as well. Green Pill. DJ B2. Time Traveling Elf. Dan the Man. Den Old Ham. The one and only Rebecca Roth, and Angel Whispers. And that rounds out the list of people who have made it into the chat room in time to hear me butcher everybody's names. So appreciate you guys all being in there tonight, and turn it back over to Mr. Kev Baker.
Well, I've been told by Marty, I think the top tip for everyone out there listening in the chat room on the website, do not refresh the site. We seem to be having some problems on there, Joe. I think I'll hand it back to you just now because we need to really lay some basic groundwork on what this whole CERN topic is about. And of course, Joe at that point disappears, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's away solving these technical problems, I think, guys.
No, I'm in the background trying to get a hold of Chris. So you guys go ahead and take over, and I'm going to try and clear up some of these technical difficulties.
Okay, so we'll go to Tony first up, and Tony, as Joe was saying, we've got some real beginners to this topic coming along, new to the whole topic of CERN, particle smashing, the whole shebang. Could you lay out the basics for what CERN actually is and what they're doing there at Geneva?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Basically, we have a series of particle accelerators at CERN, Switzerland. And what they're doing is they are accelerating microscopic particles called protons at this point to near the speed of light, 99.99% the speed of light, the threshold of the speed of light. And at a certain point within what they call a 27-kilometer ring, they have these particles traveling at near the speed of light in opposite directions. There are two beam lines. You can think of them as laser beams that are in two circles, traveling through two separate pipes, as they call them, or tunnels. And these protons, these massively accelerated, highly accelerated particles, are traveling in opposite directions in two separate pipes. At certain points, they actually cross these laser beams. They're not laser, but I'm using that as a metaphor. They will cross these laser streams, these beams of particles. And when they cross them, a certain percentage, we can say about 25% of those particles that are accelerated, will actually collide head-on, and sometimes glancing blows, but let's just say they collide head-on where the streams cross. This generates tremendous amounts of energies, highest energies we've ever seen. And from that, we also are generating large amounts of magnetic fields that are extending through the planet and also out to our shields, the magnetosphere, that essentially wraps around the Earth and protects the Earth from things like gamma rays and particles coming from the sun and from the universe as a whole. So what we have here is the largest machine, most expensive machine ever built by man, that really basically is just smashing rocks together to see what will happen. And I'll stop there.
Wow. And of course, when this whole CERN thing started up and they were firing the first of the beams a few years ago, we had a lot of talk about the fact that this could be some kind of earthquake machine because of the size of the magnets involved. Now, obviously this led to us researching this deeper, and we came up with the fact that when CERN is on, the magnets are on, it produces an electromagnetic field 100,000 times greater than the Earth. So if people can picture usually the lines that come out of the planet normally, and when you see the globe and they show you the magnetic lines, the magnetosphere, how they wrap around the planet. Well, if you can picture something 100,000 times the strength of that going upwards into the magnetosphere and beyond, but also going downwards as well. Is that not right, Tony?
Yes, indeed. And we're going to move into an area called gravimetric waves and telluric, that's Telluric, telluric currents that induce gravimetric waves, essentially gravity waves that are passing along the crust of the Earth and also through the mantle of the Earth. And this is what it appears is generating some of these significant earthquakes and reactivating volcanoes. So we have a direct correlation between the superconducting magnets in CERN and the magnetic fields that are generated by these accelerated particles. That in itself generates magnetic fields that will then change the shields around our planet, and I'm being very simple here, but also change the gravity, the gravimetric relationship of our mantle and our crust to the tectonic plates, shifting the plates, if you will.
Wow, that's interesting. You know, Tony, one thing I've noticed is that when they turn on CERN, they typically will shut it down, especially during a solar event. Yeah, if you notice, like if there's a solar flare or a coronal mass ejection inbound, they'll shut it down. Is that because it actually interferes with the magnetic field of the Earth?
Yes, actually what more specifically is taking place is you have to think of the beams that are composed of protons being accelerated. These beams are 1,000,000 times thinner than a human hair. They're compressed down into very compact, thin beams of particles that are moving in what are called bunches, very closely spaced bunches of particles. These bunches comprise of 1 billion to several billion protons in each bunch, and we have millions of these bunches comprising the beam. Now, that beam of protons is very fragile, and if you have other protons that are accelerated coming off of the sun and increasing in their speed as they move farther from the sun because they're moving through a magnetic field that is accelerating these protons. Those protons penetrate our magnetic shields, the magnetosphere, and reach the surface of the Earth And even though the Large Hadron Collider at CERN is 300 feet below ground, those protons still have the ability to penetrate the Earth and disrupt the integrity of these very, very fragile beams of particles. So they shut down because they need to maintain the integrity of these beams.
Now here's another question. How do these particles overcome the magnetic field that's supposed to contain these beams?
Which particles are you talking about?
From
the sun?
Well, no, say the beam itself, right? The beam itself for CERN is contained within a magnetic field, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So I mean, how do these particles actually penetrate that field? Isn't that field meant to isolate the beam itself?
Yes, it is. And so the particles within the beam, within the particle stream, they don't leave the pipes. They stay within the confines of the pipe because those magnets, the superconducting magnets, are focused and steering. They're bending the beam into a circle and keeping that beam focused into a circular pattern, and also focused within the center point of that vacuum tube. Those pipes, or that beam line, is actually a vacuum, and they need to keep the particles in that stream within the dead center of that. And that's what the magnets are doing, is maintaining the position of the beam, but also compressing and squeezing the beam using collimators. And that's another device that's in the detectors. But the point is the magnets are there, one, to steer the beams into a circle, and two, to compress them down, to squeeze them down into a very dense beam, so they can maximize the amount of energy that is derived when the beams are crossed and the particles collide. They get many, many more collisions, therefore more energy from those collisions.
Anthony, I wanted to ask you, since we're on the subject of the encapsulation of these beams or the photons inside of magnetism, one of the things that we've talked about in the past on the program is the fact that as this matter is speeding up, nearing the speed of light, that the mass of these photons actually gains exponentially. So how does that exponential gain relate to the energy involved with keeping them isolated with magnetism? I mean, is that why we see such a strong magnetational, that's probably the wrong word, but, a strong magnetic field there? Is that in relation to how big they anticipate the mass of these things getting?
Yeah, you're on the right track there. Step one, when they are accelerating the particles, it reaches the threshold of the speed of light, that 99% we talk about. At that point, the particle can no longer be accelerated to a higher speed. It essentially hits, kind of like the sound barrier, except you can't break it. It hits that barrier. But they continue to pump energy in the form of microwaves and radio frequency energy. And there's a couple of stages to that, but it starts with radio frequency, pushing and accelerating the particles, and then microwaves are used to accelerate them even further. Once they reach that threshold, they can't accelerate them anymore, but they can continue to pump microwave energy at the particles, at the stream. When they do that, they increase the mass by 14,000 times its original mass prior to acceleration, and that is called the resting mass. So they take it from a resting point, they accelerate it to 99% the speed of light. At that point, they continue to pump energy at them, increasing them to a mass that is 14,000 times its original mass. They do that so that when the particles collide, they generate more energy due to the greater mass.
Just unbelievable. I'm just trying to get my mind around how this whole project really works and what the outcome is going to be from doing all of this,
It's all absolutely fascinating. And, I first came across Tony on Clive Lewis's show. Now, they were talking about these gravimetric waves that Tony's mentioned just previously. And I want to go back to that because these telluric telluric waves or telluric currents that are produced. Now, on the show and across alternative media over the past few weeks and months, there's been a lot of talk about this actual. Sorry, somebody messaging me in the chat there. What's up, Marty?
I can just hear a stream somewhere. Sorry, I didn't mean to put you off there, man.
You guys okay?
Hello?
Yeah, well, I'm okay.
Yeah.
I don't know where we're getting a stream from. I can't hear it, Joe. Can you hear it?
No, I got Chris right now.
No, okay. So, yeah, like I was saying, these telluric currents, Tony. So, what we've all been talking about in the alternative media and a lot on the Kev Baker show is these sounds of the apocalypse. Now, these are actually connected, aren't they?
Yeah, I do believe so. I think if we take an example of the satellites that we have sent to Saturn and the moons of Saturn, we are hearing actual audible recordings of sounds coming from Saturn and the other moons. What we're hearing is what I call the sounds of plasma. It's important for people to understand that the vacuum of space is actually filled with electrically charged plasma and currents of moving particles, electrons, between planets. That's the natural state of the universe, and that was defined by Tesla. So if we picture that we have plasma in the vacuum of space, the sounds that we're hearing are the sounds, and I'm being very simplistic here, we're hearing the sounds of electric plasma.
And you know, this reminds me of the sounds as well, Tony, that we heard from Comet 67P when the Rosetta probe actually approached that. We were hearing what is arguably this plasma discharge.
That's correct. You're hearing electricity. That's a very simplistic way to wrap your head around it. And so what we're talking about here when we talk about telluric, I can't even say it, telluric currents, Telluric, if people want to look that up. These currents actually are generated because of the geomagnetic field around the Earth, the magnetosphere. These currents are generated and then they are conducted back to the surface of the Earth and back into the mantle of the Earth, and they induce gravimetric waves. They induce a physical wave that moves through the crust, and that is where we're hearing the sounds. We're hearing the sounds in the atmosphere as these currents are conducted from the magnetosphere back to the Earth. The Earth is a conductor, and the Earth is also a battery. It is receiving these currents just like you would be charging a battery, and we're hearing that movement of the electrons in the form of currents as these sounds. Some people want to call them the trumpets.
And of course, because they're geomagnetically induced currents in the first place, which naturally occur in the crust and the mantle, when we switch on that magnet behemoth machine at CERN with 100,000 times the power, that's obviously going to have an effect. It's obviously going to start producing more of these currents, JB, and with more of these currents, you get that byproduct of the gravimetric waves. And when it comes to gravimetric waves, it was Clyde Lewis again. He had looked into research that said that there was some kind of theory out there about an electrical crust. Now, this all came about at the time of the German wings disaster, and we were speculating if there might be some connection. Well, if you fast forward, we've had the Nepal quake, and that was in the Himalayas, where, again, one of these mountain ranges, you get this electrical crust theory possibly happening. We had that going off at the same time as CERN. We also had the Chile volcano, again, at the Andes. And it seems to me as if that could really be evidence that there is some weight to what we're saying here.
Yeah, I think so. Back about 3 months ago when I was first invited on to Ground Zero with Clyde Lewis, he posed much the same questions that you are, in the sense of could the superconducting magnets at CERN be responsible for at least some of the earthquake and volcanic activity that we're seeing. And I postulated that from a physics standpoint, there's every reason to believe that it does have a correlation to that, those physical effects with the Earth. The other.
You're listening to the Truth Frequency Radio Network.
No hate, no hype, no fear.
Welcome back, everybody. It's Freaky Friday, and boy, did we get off to a freaky start here on Truth Frequency Radio, truthfrequencyradio.com. Joe Joseph here, along with Kev Baker, Marty, Johnny Whistles, J.D. Moore, and our special guest, Anthony Patch, his website, anthonypatch.com. And before we get back into that, I want to recap. So, it's hard. It's hard, first of all, when you get off to a rocky start with technical difficulties. So now that that's out of the way, you know how hard it is to get probably the most difficult person or people when it comes to enlightening them on what things are really all about is normally family, right? It's normally the family members, your moms, your dads, that are always the last ones to kind of be receptive to this. They're always the hardest ones. They're the high-hanging fruits, if you will. So I got to give a special shout-out to my mom, my mother-in-law tonight, because she's tuning in to find out about CERN. And that's huge. That's huge. And it goes to show you, because she's very spiritually receptive, too, and understands that there's more to it. There's more to all this that meets the eye. And you guys were bringing up the trumpet sounds. And I love how we can go and break it down and understand the science behind it all, because it's very important to understand all that kind of stuff. But, the funny thing is when I look at that, first of all, I take science and I don't separate God and science. I think they go hand in hand. God and science go hand in hand. That's why there's a spiritual aspect to CERN as well. But with the trumpets, you have to ask yourself, well, why are the trumpets sounding? We can tell why it works, but what's behind it? And we look at ancient texts, especially the Bible, and it talks about these trumpets being a warning, and here we have a very interesting year. So not only are they firing up CERN at 13 tera electron volts, which is unbelievable, and creating doorways to other dimensions, they're also doing things like, yes, we want to figure out what the Higgs boson, and we want to identify it. What is it really all about? And when we look at it, it's really all about, JD, piercing the veil. That's really what it gets into, is piercing the veil. And this is a year where we've got, it's a Shemitah year. We've got blood moons. We've got all sorts of signs in the heavens. There's a lot of things going on right now. And I think it's pivotal to not only understand, you've got the spiritual side, but here we've got the opportunity right now to bring them together, the spiritual and the science together, to form a much more complete picture. And that's what I hope everybody gets tonight out of all this.
Well, and that's why we've got Anthony here. I mean, he's the guy that can actually tie these two things together in a really profound and simple way. And I'm, once again, just want to take some time to thank Anthony for coming onto the program once again, because he always brings the best information, and especially big shout out to not only to your mom, Joe, but to everybody out there that's got an open mind enough to tune in to a broadcast like this because they're curious. And really, no matter what their age, I'm always impressed when my father calls me and wants to talk about 9/11 and all of these things that 10 years ago would have been totally taboo. And I think that all plays into this idea that this collective consciousness that we all share is starting to evolve. And there really is a lot of evidence of that happening right now. And maybe it's going to take something like a bunch of idiots running the largest machine on the planet, making people say, okay, this maybe is time that we all have to start waking up and paying attention to these things, Joe.
Absolutely. Now, Kev, before the break, you got derailed, something awful. So with that said, if you are up to picking up where you left off, fantastic. If you don't want to, well, then we'll just throw it to Tony.
No, I'm cool. We were just basically covering the telluric currents that are formed. Now, these currents could well be responsible for the trumpet noises. Now, I don't know what you guys were covering there, but it could well be that this scientific reason for this, it doesn't need to poo-poo any kind of biblical prophecy kind of stuff like that. The two will marry up. But on the other side of this trumpets of the apocalypse and these telluric currents, when they come back down towards the Earth and then more to the point in towards the core, what they actually do is, because they're pushing energy about down there, they could well be producing gravimetric waves. Now, gravimetric waves could well be concentrated around mountain ranges, and this was something that was put out in a theory a long time ago. Now, if that is the case, we'd be seeing things happening at mountain ranges. Well, we've had the German wings disaster. We've had CERN been on hours before the Nepal quake. We've got earthquakes off Chile. We've got a volcano in Chile. Again, that's the Andes. You know, it's almost as if this really is evidence of just the kind of theories that we were putting together when we first got Tony onto the show.
You know, Kev, while we're on the subject of these telluric currents, obviously this comes out of this torus-style math, and you know, we're talking about the idea of increasing the gravitational waves of the Earth, which, if you look at a magnetic model, it is a torus, right? If I'm not mistaken. Hopefully Anthony can back me up on that. But it is, a flowing that goes around both hemispheres that basically looks like two donuts stacked on top of one another. And I want to know what the effect is of changing the points. If everything is kind of, we'll say, pole to pole, even though we know the poles aren't exactly accurate, if that's kind of the point at which all this energy flows back into the planet and then comes out and then flows back around, what would the effect be of creating something like CERN? Wouldn't that pull one of those focal points, especially when you're 100,000 times stronger than the actual magnetosphere of the Earth? Wouldn't that pull one of those focal points of the torus way off to one side? Am I out of touch on this one, Anthony?
Well, in theory, that's true, but really, the Large Hadron Collider has the ability to focus its magnetic lines of force. And so they don't necessarily want to cause, where I think you're going, is a pole shift. That's not really what they're after. What they're after is to form in the atmosphere, in the magnetosphere, a donut shape, the torus, as it's called, in the magnetosphere, but beyond the magnetosphere, the actual torus will be realized. It will be actually physically created by projecting the magnetic lines of force out into the vacuum, into outer space, between the moon and the Earth. Picture a donut hanging in space between the surface of the Earth and the moon. And the reason I say that they're going to be doing that is because, number one, we already have the magnetic lines of force, as you correctly said, are two donuts, the magnetosphere, and that is surrounding the Earth, but they are artificially generating toroidal fields, magnetic lines of force, on a smaller scale. They're creating the same thing that is surrounding the Earth, using the Large Hadron Collider, using that combination of the superconducting magnets and the magnetic fields that I spoke of before the break that are generated by the movement of the particles. They want to create a magnetic donut, and I'm being simplistic here, magnetic donut that will be projected and focused between the moon and the Earth. So I'll stop there.
Well, that just boggles my mind, because what that leads me to believe is that they're creating smaller magnetic donuts right now. And that kind of gets me into this idea that they could be using this thing to create, localized gravitational events, which brings us back to the German wings disaster, brings us over to this plane that lost its engine power over flying from Singapore to Shanghai this week and had to, go down 13,000 feet pretty recently. Those are strange things that are happening right now, and it's unusual to me that you're mentioning the fact that they're actually trying to create a physical structure out in space using nothing but gravity and plasma and electricity. And I'm wondering what would the effect on the Earth be once they actually created something like that in terms of gravitational pull, Anthony?
Well, when you form this donut, which is called a torus, you have a hole in the middle, and there are two streams of energy. that will be projected out from that hole. Let's call it in the North Pole direction towards the moon, and we'll call the other direction opposite to that one the south direction from the hole of this donut. The energy stream that is going to the North Pole of the donut, out from the center portion of the donut, and directed towards the moon, those are electrons. Okay? What is projected the opposite direction from that are protons. And that's naturally occurring when you have a formation of a torus. So now we have a line of current that is connecting the moon to the Earth. And this is something that existed in previous times. And there are drawings and etchings and ancient records that illustrate that this actually occurred during what is known as the Golden Age in the 4th dynasty of the Egyptian dynasties. So what they're doing is recreating something that existed back in the 4th dynasty. And this is all, as I said, recorded.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. And so, I find this absolutely interesting. When you brought up the Germanwings disaster, JD, when I first saw that, it kind of the first thing I thought, guys, was it had to be scalar, longitudinal EM, something that's been available basically since the 60s. Tesla was messing with longitudinal EM. T. Henry Murray in the 20s was messing with longitudinal EM. So this is not new technology. The question is, because it seems to me that this has very similar characteristics to, scalar interferometers, these magnetic fields that are created and can be directed basically anywhere there is. But now we're starting to talk about a device that can reconnect these Birkeland currents, if you will, reconnect these planets and get these energy flows going again. What is the significance to that, Tony? What's the purpose to all that? What are they trying to achieve?
Well, I mentioned the Golden Age, and that is a time when they believed that you could achieve immortality. That is a time when they believed that there was peace and harmony on the planet. And that is what they're trying to recreate. And how they're going to do that, and again, this is taken from the ancient studies. They want to connect first to the moon electrically. Then they want to use the moon as, let's call it a hub, to redirect and re-aim that energy that strikes the moon and reconnect to the southern pole of Saturn as their first step. Ultimately, they would like to reconnect all of the planets in the way that it existed during the Golden Age. During the Golden Age, the planets were aligned. You had Saturn, Venus, and Mars in alignment with the Earth and in close proximity to the Earth, very close. And they were all electrically connected. You had plasma discharges. You had Birkeland currents that were conducting between those planets and the Earth. So everything was electrically connected in a much closer fashion, much closer relationship. They cannot change the orbits of the planets, but they can electrically reconnect them. Now, the planets are already electrically connected, but what they're doing is enhancing the electrical connection, the electromagnetic connection, if you will. They are trying to enhance that. Their purpose is to recreate on Earth the physical conditions that they believe existed during the Golden Age. They believe that this is... Go ahead.
Well, basically, this would be a modern-day Tower of Babel, would it not?
Absolutely.
So basically what we're looking at is it's much more than just an interdimensional portal.
And I know it sounds wacky, folks. I know it's out there, but you have to look at it. I don't know. It's hard. But when you look at what they're doing, especially when it comes to smashing things together, magnetic fields aside, when they start smashing these particles together and they start ripping things apart and opening holes, it's fascinating. These people have no idea. Well, I think they have an idea. They have some sort of idea. But do they really, Tony? Do they really have an idea of what they're messing with?
No, even the scientists who have been representative, have been, the public information officer, if you will, for CERN, have even said openly in the mainstream media, they're not sure what is going to happen at 13 TeV when they are colliding particles. We have 13 TeV now, but we don't have collisions of particles taking place. Right. They have openly said, we don't know what's going to happen. We are entering a time of entirely new physics, and we are looking for parallel universes. We are looking for new dimensions. Those are their words.
And that's the thing, because just in the past week or so, we've had these test collisions. Now, I was having a laugh at the time, saying that they possibly put crash helmets on the protons, or they told them just to go a little bit slower. But what was actually happening, guys, was they were crashing in, or they were going into the collimators in the detectors. And when we even see these demonic faces, Tony, I believe that's actually a representation of the protons hitting these collimators, is it not?
Yes, it is. You're exactly right. The collimators reside at the detectors, where they will eventually be crossing the streams and causing collisions. Right now, you're exactly correct. The beams are generating 13 TeV as a result of collisions within the detectors themselves and within the collimators. The collimators are the things that squeeze down the beam into a very tight focus. Like I said, 1,000,000 times thinner than a human hair. And so the collimators are squeezing down, and they're allowing these beams to strike the collimators and also the surfaces of the detectors for the purpose of doing what they're calling commissioning the beam and calibrating these detectors. And so they actually have particle collisions taking place, not particle to particle, but particle to the machine itself, the detector. And then they are taking measurements, and they're recording images of those collisions, and they're measuring the 13 tera-electron volts as a total of those collisions occurring with the machine.
Tony, I want to ask too: Are there any other ancillary, effects from smashing these particles? I mean, are we seeing like a lot of heat released or a lot of light, things like that? Are there other things that are being created other than just, these wild photon shapes or whatever? What else is actually potentially happening in that tube that we might want to know about?
Well, there are extremely high temperatures that are generated, but they only last for, minute amounts of time. And we're talking about, in some cases, picoseconds, in some cases, nanoseconds, which are a little bit longer. But these are, in some cases, 10,000 times to 1,000,000 times higher temperatures than we see on our own sun. But they exist for such a short duration of time that they really don't have the ability to heat up anything else around it. So the heat is inconsequential, even though in the measurement of the heat it is substantial. You are also generating gamma rays and X-rays by the movement of these particles in a circular pathway. These are called synchrotron energies. There are particle accelerators that are called synchrotrons because of the energies that are generated by these particles moving in this circular fashion. They don't have to collide to generate synchrotron energies, which are gamma rays and X-rays. And that is what they call high luminosity. High luminosity specifically is related to high energy X-rays. And those X-rays are the brightest light, not visible, but the brightest light at the X-ray level that have ever been generated by man.
Wow.
Yeah, that's
So-
huge. You know, you think about that. That's an achievement. And let's be honest. You know, God said when the Tower of Babel was being built, God said, I have to confuse the languages. Otherwise, nothing would be impossible for these people. And so he did. The difference now is that barrier's been broken. You know, the advent of the internet and everything else, we've come back together again. You know, now you got Google Translate. There's no language barrier anymore. It's gone. And so God even recognized that in the Bible. He said, I got to do this. Otherwise, good God, if I don't scatter these people and confuse the languages, nothing's impossible for them. So guess what? We're at that point again where nothing is impossible. And we're starting to mess with things that have some serious consequences. You know? Think about this. It's not just CERN related too. We've got the human genome, right, Kev? I mean, we got that going on. We're messing with that. We're in the times of Noah. You know?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, we had a case we covered on the show about a young lad who had a brain tumour. Now, there was a big fuss at the time because they were threatening to jail the parents because they went abroad to seek something called proton beam therapy.
Ah, yeah.
Now, this all comes from particle colliders, Joe.
Oh, no, that was in Croatia. No, not Croatia. It was in Ukraine. Was it not?
I'm not sure. It was Eastern Europe. Marty, can you remember what country the Kings actually travelled to for that? I think it was Bulgaria, possibly, Marty, was it?
Yeah, pass. It was definitely Europe somewhere. Sorry.
Definitely Eastern
But it
Europe.
just shows you, in case of, instead of like ripping holes in the veil of time and space, we could be putting it into the betterment of man in that kind of contraption. But you
That's
know,
right.
something else I want to get into with Tony here before we hit the break, and we haven't had a chance to speak to him since this happened, was the unidentified lying object in the actual vacuum. Now, Tony, when this all happened, I was speculating that during the first round of experiments back in 2012, before they shut down to upgrade the magnets, there was actually reports of over 10,000 UFOs turning up in the stream. Now, by UFOs, I don't mean flying objects. They were describing like falling objects, almost like dust particles. And then step up the power, they come back, and all of a sudden we have Albert de Roque, the head of the CMS detector, saying that they have detected some kind of unidentified lying object. Now, I was thinking with the power going up, has that falling object now materialized into a more stable state because they are now at a higher power?
Yeah, and also I think if we go back into 2010, 2011, 2012, before they shut the machine down, they were seeing what they described as ghost energies. Energies they could not determine the source of, nor could they actually understand the makeup of that ghost energy. It was an energy form that they had never seen before. And now we have the manifestation of an actual particle that they cannot identify. And that's the intriguing part here. If it was a piece of debris left over from the assembly of the pipe, the vacuum tube, they could identify it as a piece of metal or plastic or whatnot. But they have yet to identify it, and therefore I think this is akin to the ghost energy that they saw at the lower power levels. I think we are seeing a particle or a substance that does not naturally occur. And I don't know if I can go so far as to say that its source is from another dimension or not, because I don't have anything to really base that on, but we could make the conjecture that perhaps it is something that is winking through, that is leaking through from another dimension. The interesting thing that I find here is not only can they not identify it, but it's stable. It's remaining in this dimension. And we haven't even started colliding particles together, which will essentially create this dimensional portal.
Exactly. And right now, when you're looking at the images of the particles actually hitting these collimators, we have seen these demonic faces. Now, along with these ghost spikes, Tony, and this unidentified line object,
Plus, we've had the announcement that they found rare Bs. Was it meson B particles, something like that?
Right.
Is this the scientific evidence that they're going to put in a paper, put a ribbon round it, and say, well, we've got extra energy coming from somewhere, we've got unseen particles coming from somewhere, we've got objects coming from somewhere. This is proof of the alternative universe.
Yeah, I think you're on the right track. The B meson was detected within the LHC-B detector, and that actually occurred back in 2012, and they're finally getting all of the data crunched from those collisions that took place and the detector generating that data, and it's taken them a couple of years to get through it and to be able to model from that data what they think they have found. And what they think they have found is an entirely new particle. They want to call it antimatter. They want to say that it's antimatter that has color that they've been able to photograph. I don't think there's definitive proof that it's antimatter. The reason for that is it is not self-annihilating. When you bring matter and antimatter together, as you know, it self-annihilates. It cancels out. These particles are remaining. So in the strictest definition of antimatter, I don't think they fit the criteria. But do they fit the criteria as proof due to their mass, due to their weight, their nuclear weight or nuclear mass? Do they meet the criteria to prove another dimension has been tapped into or broached? I don't know,
folks, but the music is there. We are broaching the veil here. We are piercing into the other dimension. And we'll take a look at what happens on the other side of these short messages.
This is the Truth Frequency Radio Network. We are TFR. Truth Frequency Radio.
It's hour number 2 of Freaky Friday right here on Truth Frequency Radio, truthfrequencyradio.com. Your easy science station. That's right. We break it down for you, smooth and easy, here at TFR. And tonight we're talking about CERN. Isn't that right, Kev?
Oh, it certainly is. And before the break, we were getting into the unidentified lying object. And as we move into hour number 2, I think you're all suitably ready for this. Let's go quantum for a little moment. And here's the thing with this unidentified lying object, and this is what makes it absolutely fascinating. Because Albert Duroc, who didn't get back to me with an invite that I gave him to come on the show, he was saying that they actually detected this unidentified lying object, and they're not too worried about it, because what they're actually going to do is they're just going to keep an eye on it. Now, anyone that knows anything about quantum physics would have been having a good laugh at that, because right now, if you actually try and picture this object, whatever it is, it's in a vacuum, it's in a pipe, and nobody can actually observe it. And that is critical, because that power of observation has a tremendous effect. It will then bring that object into an actual state, whereas right now it is both there and it isn't there. It's here and it's not. It's in this dimension, and it's quite possibly sitting in another dimension as well through something called supersymmetry. Would that be right, Tony?
You've got it correct. You always do your homework, my friend.
I do love the whole
right.
Schrodinger's cat and Schrodinger's object.
Well, we have Schrodinger's Kev here at TFR.
We've got Schrodinger's MH370.
Yeah, there's another one out there flying around in another universe.
Exactly, but that,
or
I mean,
crashed.
this quantum kind of stuff. I mean, although we're moving into more the electrical model, and as this program progresses, we'll get into that. This quantum effect, it really is fascinating. And I believe the guys at the CMS, led by Albert Duroc, this is the place where they are actually conducting the quantum style of experiments. Is that right, Tony?
That's correct. And I think what you may find interesting, do you remember when we last spoke, we talked about the adiabatic quantum computer and the qubits?
How could we
How could we possibly forget?
Again, you guys are the only ones talking about this computer, but it operates exactly along the lines of what you're talking about with this lying object and supersymmetry. If somebody wants proof that supersymmetry actually exists and it functions, this ability to be in two states, two dimensions at the same time. That's what functions within the qubits. If you want to call them transistors, just so you can understand the relationship, they're not transistors, but they function much the same way in the sense that they are the devices that the computational process takes place in. These quantum bits, these qubits, operate on the basis of supersymmetry, meaning in a very simplistic way, they are taking a mathematical problem and inserting it into another dimension, processing that equation, if you will, that problem, and extracting the answer from another dimension.
And the reason
this supersymmetry.
And the reason this takes computing on a quantum level, JD, is because if you think of an electron, and that's a positive and a negative, well, in a bit in a computer, you've got a 1 and a 0. And like Tony says there, if you can have this electron, part of it in another dimension where it's both a 1 and a 0, and you have to pay particular attention to the fact that you don't observe it. That means it can be the whole potential of everything all at once.
So we're running a computer basically on Schrodinger's electrons, is what we're saying right now.
Exactly. And where is this other electron? This is the thing.
What's the benefit of doing these calculations in another dimension? I know Tony's talked about this a little bit before, about them being able to bring back. I mean, to me, I got to stop for just a sec because I'm reading this book right now called The Sorcerer's Apprentice, a skeptic's guide into CIA's Project Stargate, and it's talking about the CIA's projects with extrasensory perception and remote viewing and things like that. And this seems like with this computer that they have come up with an electronic means to do remote viewing. Am I on base or off base with that, in your opinion, Tony?
I haven't applied it to remote viewing. That's a very interesting idea, but it certainly is operating in another dimension in the sense that they are able to take all possible solutions in a combinatorial, a combination program, a combination of all possible solutions, and simultaneously processing all of those probabilities to derive an answer. And so they're doing that at a speed, and that's why they're using supersymmetry, at a speed that we really can't even wrap our heads around. There is no transistor-based gate model supercomputer in the world that even comes close to the processing speed of this computer, because it is actually using the simultaneous states, as Kev said, of zeros being ones at the same time as ones being zeros and ones being ones and zeros being zeros. So you have a four-way supersymmetry taking place, is the way I would explain it. There's your speed. That's you're processing all the possible answers in a four-way simultaneous process.
Yeah. That's why they say that, when quantum computing becomes mainstream, encryption at that point, at least the way we know it today, is basically irrelevant. Because
that's right. Remember I talked about Shor's algorithm, 2048? 2048 is an algorithm that when Shor developed the algorithm, which means you have to look for all the prime factors in order to crack the algorithm, he said it would take a quantum computer to do it. And that's why they built the first adiabatic quantum computer, and they cracked that Shor's algorithm. They use that algorithm now as the base for an entirely new form of cryptological coding. So if you don't have an adiabatic quantum computer, you cannot tap or read the communications that are being processed by that computer. You have a new form of communication that's absolutely secure, and no transistor-based computer can crack that.
Wow. Quantum communications. Oh, man. That's pretty cool. And quantum encryption. I mean, these computers have been out now, Tony, for a while, have they not?
Yes, indeed. They started with the 128 model, 512, 1024, and now this year in February they released the 2048 model, which is a tip of the hat, if you will, to Shor's algorithm of 2048. So they have been around in the public domain, the public knowledge, since 2010, but I really have done my homework, and it has existed long before, at least 10 years before, right around 2000. These have existed in a prototypical status.
Right, which is typically how it works. You know, you're going to have prototypes and prototypes of prototypes and everything else. That's how it works. And normally the universities, you know, are the ones that do the majority of the research. So they'll sit at a university and they'll work on it and perfect it. But to me, this because it's been out for so long, and chances are it's been heavily funded by DARPA and other defense organizations. You can only imagine. Why do you think the NSA and all these organizations are so concerned when you have quantum computers that can crack these, this modern day encryption, this modern key in, seconds? Why do you think there's such a concern? I can't imagine, because they possess the technology right now to be able to do that.
Right, and what they wanted to do was have their own form of communication that no one else could read. And yet at the same time, they can read everybody else's encryption with this machine. And so they are able to tap all of the communications in the world that they care to.
Right.
Now that's for control, the ultimate application.
Yeah, absolutely. And think about that. Now that you just brought that up, that's interesting. So I wonder if they could get away with Bufftail, Utah, where you've got that facility with that exabytes, I think it is, zettabytes of storage.
Right,
yeah.
Data storage.
So you're talking zettabytes, and then you go, it's tapping every communication, recording every communication on the face of the planet, and able to do so for at least the next 100 years in its basic configuration right now. You'd have to have computing power of unimaginable magnitude to be able to pull that off, I would imagine. And that, to me, could only come from a quantum computer.
You're right. And so that people have some touch point to understand the capabilities. When the press release came out in February, they said that this computer would have the equivalent processing power of 7 billion human brains. The other part that they did not release, that they did release initially in 2010, when they projected from 2010 out to 2015, this computer model 2048 being released. Back in 2010, they said publicly, not only would it have the equivalent processing power of 7 billion human brains, but it would also be artificially intelligent. They left that part out when they released the press release in February. This computer is artificially intelligent. Now, you have to define that. You have to quantify what do you mean by artificially intelligent. But just the fact that they're acknowledging that and covering it up 5 years later, you got to ask, why are they not talking about it? Now, Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk from Tesla Motors, et cetera, both of those guys came out last year and said publicly the greatest existential threat to the human race is artificial intelligence, and you do not want to let that genie out of the bottle. They already have.
Anthony, too, and one of the things that we haven't really touched on yet, since we're talking about this machine having the potential of 6 billion human brains, or I think that was a number that you
don't
threw out.
shortchange it, baby. 7 billion.
7 billion. Okay, so roughly the equivalent of every person on the planet. We have to tie into that too all of the advancements that are going on in biology and microbiology right now. I read an article this week that they have created a one molecule diode made out of an asymmetrical virus or something that they created, but it's the absolute pinnacle of what we can do in terms of microbiology. And then there's been a lot of reports coming out recently talking about the DNA, the data storage capabilities of DNA. And you got to think that at some level, these guys are tying all of these types of ideas together into something more significant. Don't you think, Tony?
Yeah, and in previous discussions, we talked about the third strand of DNA and that third strand being artificial and being coated with a nano-thin coating of gold. That is exactly what is going on here. We are talking about transhumanism, the merging of man and machine, but you're doing that merging of man and machine at the DNA level. And we need to step back for a moment. We talked about synchrotron particle accelerators and the generating of synchrotron energies in the form of high luminosity, high-powered X-rays. They use those X-rays. I'll give you an example, specifically at Berkeley with the Advanced Light Source, synchrotron. They use that to examine the proteins, the building blocks of DNA, and they look at the structure of that protein using X-rays, and they determine the folding. They call it protein folding, how these proteins are shaped and how they change shape. They can, the long and short of it is, they can actually start at the building blocks, at the quantum level, and create designer DNA that is self-replicating, that can grow out into a human form, a hybrid.
Wow.
So they have the ability, and I am convinced by the research I have done, that we have human hybrids that have been grown from artificial DNA because we've already grown artificial organs, human organs grown from artificial DNA. We also have the ability to print DNA using rapid prototypical DNA, which is an outgrowth of the Human Genome Mapping Project that also is tied to Berkeley, where they did the mapping in Walnut Creek, just over the hill from Berkeley. They mapped it first, then they were able to look at the proteins with the X-rays. Now they can build the DNA, let it self-replicate. They grew the organs. That's in the public domain, that information. If you can grow the organs, you can grow the entire body because you have the full DNA to do that with.
So this is like transhumanism from the other angle. I mean, this is like, let's build a new being from scratch.
Like a synthetic human. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that and what I'm hearing right now is there's really no reason to believe that these synthetic humans might not be walking around amongst us right now.
Yeah, my sense of it is, and again, I try to base everything on the journals, on the actual published articles coming out of science. They already have, in a dormant state, hybrids in laboratories. Now, they may be in the form of a fetus or a fully formed adult human, but they have grown human fetisi, whatever you want to call it, fetuses, in the laboratory already. And these already exist, but they're in a state of hibernation. They're dormant.
And you're saying that's not conjecture, that's actually in published journals and in,
Yes.
mainstream. Wow.
And I mean, what does that say about, as far ethically speaking? I mean, we're getting into really shady territory here.
Roger that. That's about as gray as it gets, isn't it, Joe?
Yeah. And that's the thing. At what point do we draw the line? Marty, you've been quiet. What say you? Where do we draw the line at this?
I really don't know, guys, but fascinating topic so far. I was just wanting to chime in there when you were talking about the hybrid things and stuff. Back in 2011, the British media reported that the UK had been secretly conducting experiments with over 150 human-animal hybrids. And they're talking about all these embryos that they've been messing with and stuff for the past 3 years, up until 2011. And then they released some sort of backpedaling story on it. But yeah, it just goes to show you that the stuff that they are messing with, very, very freaky. I don't think they should be messing with it, personally.
In the ancient times, in the Bible, they called that mixing of human and animal DNA chimera. And this is going back to the time before the times of Noah, and the days of Noah that we keep hearing repeated in reference to that. And you take it from the chimera and you go all the way to the modified human, the human.
Oh dear, I think we've lost Tony there, guys.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Oh, no.
I'll try and reconnect with them, but I mean, this is fascinating right now.
This is the best day of the week, hands down, every week, guys. I mean, this is so much fun. And gosh, to have Anthony Patch on with us, this is just too good, too good.
And, you know, I was listening to Clyde Lewis, and he was saying he's got a rule where he only brings guests back after a 3-month period. And he had been really desperate to get Tony back. And, you know, I think you could have Tony every 3 days and still have new information to cover.
Well, there's so much going on in the world. It doesn't stop spinning, and these people are still at the helm at CERN. There's still all kinds of crazy anomalies happening. And, you know, to have a decent scientific edge in terms of an explanation, that's a kind of a commodity around here. So it's really nice that he makes his time available for us, you know.
And I hope Tony hasn't fallen down the CERN hole, Marty, because we're trying to actually reconnect with him here, but it's not happening.
They hit him with one of them Boeing EMP weapons that they just disclosed the other day.
Well, Marty, you know, sorry to cut you off there, JD, but just before we actually get Tony back on, since we're trying to fill a bit of time here, and I don't know where we could have squeezed this one in, Marty boy, but you have you've dug up an absolutely brilliant story, if you pardon the pun.
Well, yeah, just a little bit of a hypothesis, really, on the whole CERN thing. This one probably resonate with Joe and a couple of the guys in the chat in terms of revelations and stuff like that. I think it talks about a beast coming out of the bottomless pit, apparently. Well, at CERN, they have an underground facility called Pit 8. There isn't a Pit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. There's just a Pit 8. And it goes on to state on their website that underground visits are only allowed during the shutdown periods. It says visitors must be able to climb stairways, persons equipped with any of the following: pacemaker, defibrillator, electronic medicine dispenser, hearing aid, metal implant, or anything like that, are not authorised to enter the underground area unless the dipole magnet remains off during the visit. And it goes on to say that due to operations, covert, in the cavern, no visits will be authorised during these blackout dates. And, you've got to get some super high up the chain pass to actually get on one of these visits, but it just leads me to believe that why did they call this Pit 8? Another bit of a revelation there from the symbolism and stuff. Thought you guys would like that.
And you know, Marty, I would love to throw Dick Cheney in there, because it says if you've got a pacemaker, you don't want to be in there when the magnets are on. But this figure of 8, you know, we can tie this even to the Birkeland currents. Now, there's pictures of these things in space, guys. I've posted it in the chat earlier on. But it's like a twisted pair. It's almost like DNA. And that leads me to looking like the figure 8, the infinity figure. And JD, you've been digging up some figure of 8 symbology, haven't you?
Well, I've been trying to get my mind around this infinity sign and a connection to Saturn, because it seems like every time I'm researching my favorite subject of late, which is, you know, the Berenstein Bears and the Mandela effect. We should really start calling it the Mandela effect, which is a better name for it. But the number 8 keeps coming up over and over and over again, not just in that subject area, but with the Saturn connection. I don't really understand exactly what it is in terms of toroidal math, because it's not a number that's super significant in terms of the 3, 6, and 9 and getting us into Tesla and all this other stuff. But for some reason, there are a lot of mentions of both the number 8 and the number 88 that seem to come up with all of these Saturn connections.
And you know, we had the recent Amtrak incident, and that was train number 188. Mm-hmm. And we had
8 people who passed away on that, by the way.
We had a J.J. Abrams film that showed a train crashing and an alien that was on board, and it had a number 8 on it as well.
Well, you know, and I'm jumping into the Bears here, guy, for just a second, because, you know, I've been doing all this research on there. I'm telling you, there's something to this, because, Joe, I came across one of their older episodes, and it's called The Bad Dream. That's the name of it. You can go find it on YouTube, and it's kind of like the dark episode of the Berenstein Bears, right? And wouldn't you know it, so it's about them sitting around watching a video, and the video has got an evildoer and a good guy in it, and it's all out in space, right? It's all happening out in space. There are so many Saturn connections involving the bad guy. He's got all these Saturn symbols on him and things like that. And then it's funny, Kevin, that you just mentioned the train, because there's a scene in that episode where there is a train getting ready to pull out of the station, and wouldn't you know it, that train is number 88. And it just boggles my mind. The more I dig into this Berenstein Bears thing, the more I am absolutely convinced, Joe,
get this, JD,
something has changed.
Because Marty's going to take the 8s even further. Go, man.
Oh, well, you remember NASA? those guys. Never a straight answer. Well, they actually designed the Saturn C8 rockets.
Oh, wow. Well, and if you think C in terms of numerology, number 3, that's the number for Saturn, if I'm not mistaken.
And when we're speaking of NASA there, weren't you posting a really interesting conspiracy just before the show in the chat room?
Boy, I'll tell you, this has really got my head spinning, guys. And I'll put this link in the chat one more time. But this person has done an amazing amount of research in this. And this was actually a guy named Dr. Owen who put this whole story together. And it has to do with the Challenger space shuttle disaster, which I'm sure many of us here on the show still remember. It was obviously happened when we were very young. But, the Challenger space shuttle disaster was something we all watched on TV back in 1986. This guy makes a pretty amazing argument saying that all of these guys, the commander, the crew of that Challenger space shuttle are all still alive, guys. And they've got LinkedIn pages. These guys are all employees of major Ivy League schools, or they work for the government in some capacity. And I'll tell you, look at the pictures of these guys as crew members back in their official NASA uniforms, and then you see them on their LinkedIn pages. I mean, these aren't cultivated from crazy websites. These are these people's pictures. One of them is a professor at Yale, and they've got 3 or 4 of her pictures from working at Yale. It's not it comes straight from the Yale website. And these people, there's no way these aren't these people from the Challenger explosion. So my question, coming back to this idea of these interchangeable timelines, is that did we really witness a disaster, or was that something that only some of us saw, only some of us remember? I don't know. I haven't got my mind around it now, but I'll tell you, you look at, and all of their names are the same. I mean, you got Judith Resnick, who was the Challenger missile specialist, and now Judith Resnick, who is a Yale law professor. Same thing with Mr. Ronald McNair. They don't even bother. He goes now by Carl McNail, but they don't change their last names, and the pictures are just spot on. And I don't believe this is Photoshop. I think this is just another thing, and it goes back to this Mandela effect. A lot of people out there, and I don't know if you guys will corroborate this or not, but a lot of people out there seem to have memories of Nelson Mandela dying in jail back in the 1980s. People remember seeing processions on the TV, documentaries about his life and things like that. I mean, a pretty substantial amount of people. I don't know if you guys do.
Yeah, people really even remember Billy Graham getting actually buried at one point as well, and then he was back on the TV. And it's that's where it, obviously the Mandela thing you're talking about is where it takes its name from. Right. But this kind of stuff, this is Freaky Friday. All food and drink, is it not?
Oh, I think this is the bread and butter of Freaky Friday as far as I'm concerned, man, because the bottom line for me is I understand that everybody thinks this Berenstein Bears thing is crazy, but the bottom line is that I could pass a polygraph test. I would absolutely, without a doubt, pass a polygraph test if somebody said, is this how you spell this? With an E and not an A. I would pass that test, and no questions asked.
Well, folks, we are right up on the break. But stay tuned. We're going to try and pull Tony out of the CERN hole, and we'll come back and we're going to get into some uber woo. So please stay tuned. Don't go anywhere, guys.
The CERN hole, man.
The CERN hole, Joe.
This is Truth Frequency Radio.
The wicked ones, obviously under heavy Masonic influence.
Welcome back to the second half of Freaky Friday, folks. Tonight you're joined by the wonderful Woo crew of myself, Kev Baker, Joe Joseph, J.D. Moore, and we're shortly going to be joined by Big Marty, Johnny Whistles, and we've got a couple of extra guests as well. But Joe, what's happening with this connection?
What the? It's all I could say. Popeye, I think, said it best during the break. He said, because Microsoft.
About slowly trying to bring everyone back into the call here. But yeah, just really, really strange. It's funny how you talk about these topics and then all of this starts happening.
Yeah. Yeah, again, and this is where it's not, I don't look at it more like it's, it's NSA going in looking at, no. You're giving the NSA way too much credit, first of all, because I'm sorry. They would be so much farther ahead with the technology they possess if they were semi-competent, and they're not. So let's just keep that in mind. It's really it all comes down to what forces are in play here. And I mean, really,
Well, Joe, I'm glad you brought that up, because today I don't know if everyone out there, and I doubt it looking at the numbers on the stream right now, we were talking with JD on his show about CERN and stuff like that, and we started connecting some dots that we think may well be relevant. And I'm going to play a clip here from that show. So if we just listen to this, and then we'll come back and discuss it.
This is the Cam Baker Show.
Since we are gearing up for a pretty amazing woo crew tonight, should we try and maybe prime the pumps a little bit? Do you have any extra woo that you could drop on us this morning, brother?
Yeah, you know I've got extra woo. And unfortunately, this all came together in my head just over the past few hours. Now, I don't know if people have noticed the new viral craze that is happening at the moment. And this is basically the Charlie craze. Mm-hmm. Now, we've had the Ice Bucket Challenge, stuff like that. But this is a creepy Charlie challenge, and it's been spreading across Twitter. And what they're doing, folks, is they're actually trying, allegedly, apparently, to summon some kind of Mexican demon. Now, I've got a couple of clips here that I've looped together, and I'll let you listen to that. But if you just listen to this is what's going on in the bedrooms of young people around the world right now. So I'll just cue this up. Here we go.
Charlie, are you here? Oh, Charlie,
Charlie, are you here?
Charlie, are you here? Oh, Charlie,
Charlie, are you here?
So there you go. This is people obviously doing this Charlie challenge. Now what they do is you get a piece of paper. Not that I'm telling people to do this. I certainly ain't going to try it. You get a bit of paper and you draw one line up the middle and a line right across it. So you've got a cross basically. You put yes, no in the top boxes and no, yes in the bottom boxes. Then what you do, you take 2 pencils and you line them up and cross and actually balance them along as if they're sitting along the 2 lines that you drew. Now, when you look at that, obviously you guys know I live down the CERN hole. Now, you're crossing pencils. So you can really think on a kind of macro level, it's kind of similar to crossing beams at CERN. And when you're talking about CERN, what have we heard these physicists saying they're doing? They're trying to literally open portals to other dimensions. Now, I know this sounds crazy, guys, but on a smaller level, is that not almost what we're seeing here by the calling of Charlie trying to summon a demon? And then that got me thinking even more about this because something was niggling away at me. And it's this whole Charlie thing. Now, I don't know if there's anything in the experiment, but we always speak about frequencies and vibrations on this show. And if you can get enough people sitting around the world at different times of the day, constantly Charlie, could it be like you're building some kind of rhythmic kind of energy, some kind of low vibrational Charlie? And then when I was saying it to myself, it sounds awfully like Kali. Now, Kali is actually, get this, an ancient god. Now, if you think back to when Miley Cyrus was doing her twerking and sticking the tongue out and things like that. I
prefer not to, but okay.
Okay, bear with me here. We have Jamie Hanshaw on both our shows. Mm-hmm. Her and Freeman were talking about the fact that she was actually representing or symbolizing the god Kali. Now, I went and looked at the images of Kali, and it struck me right away, and I sent you the image, JD, and I'll send it to the chat room in a moment. But if you type in Kali into Google and go to Google Images, you'll see something that is strikingly similar to Shiva. Now, Shiva, of course, sits in the grounds of CERN and is described as the destroyer and the creator of worlds. Ooh. So I went and looked into Kali. Now, just take a listen to this. Now, Kali is also known as Kalika, and it is the Hindu goddess associated with empowerment, or Shakti. She is the fierce aspect of the goddess Durga. The name Kali comes from Kala, which means black, time, death, Lord of the Dance, or Lord of the Death. Then it goes on to say that Shiva, since Shiva is called Kala, the eternal time, the name of Kali, his consort, also means time or death. Hence, Kali is the goddess of time, change, power, and destruction. And the fact that this goes hand in hand with that deity, Shiva, over at CERN, when they, on the massive level, are crossing beams, trying to open portals, we have the partner of that almost been summoned up in this micro kind of level with the crossing of pencils to represent the opening of a portal. Bit woo for this time of the day, guys?
I'll tell you what, I don't think that's too woo for this time of day at all. And to be perfectly honest, that kind of freaks me out a little bit, Kevin, having the goddess of time and the lord of death basically guarding the front interest of CERN. And then, let's throw our mind back to that interpretive dance that CERN put out the other day called Symmetry. And I'll tell you, looking at that, it looks a whole lot like the destruction of time being represented in a dance form, don't you think?
I mean, this is it's crazy stuff. And like we said, we're only putting this together kind of before the show. And I think if we dig deeper into this is going to go to a whole new level of woo. But Marty, that's the first time you've probably heard that, the whole Charlie, the Kali. You deal with vibrations and stuff like that. And the fact that it's connected to Shiva over at CERN, what do you make of that, man?
Yeah, very, very good timing, I'd say, for those guys and whoever's really put this meme out there for young kids to jump on. When you really look at it, it's just a makeshift version of a Ouija board.
It does seem to be, yeah.
We've also had a Vatican-approved exorcist that's come out today warning people against the dangers of playing such a game. And he goes on to say that this will result in the spirits being able to enter, into even more frequent communication, and you might not be able to get rid of them, sort of thing. So I'm not really trying to back up the dude from the Vatican there, but I'd say that playing with this stuff is dangerous.
Well, and that's interesting. I got to cut you off because that's interesting that you mentioned that, because one of the tricks of this game from the research that I've done is that they say that it's very important to say goodbye to this entity, Charlie, whenever he shows up, or you will run the risk of him basically hanging out with you forever. So that's really interesting that you bring that up, Marty.
That is the same, because even in Ouija boards, you have to actually dispel the demon before you actually leave, or the entity. And somebody in the chat room, I think it was Hyperborean, came up with a good one there. How many people were chanting about Je suis Charlie not too long ago?
Oh, wow. I didn't even think of that, man.
So there you go, folks. And this is the whole Charlie, Kali connection that we were coming up with today. And JD, I see you're wanting to jump in here.
Oh, man.
And if you also want to introduce our new guests as well, man.
Oh, I'd love to. Yes, we have to do that. We are very fortunate, to be welcoming Anthony Patch back to the program. We've gotten through that little electrical snafu. And we also have the addition of the one and only Rebecca Roth, who I believe will be beginning her own show tomorrow, early afternoon Central Time, 2 o'clock here on TFR. And I'm stupid excited about that, ladies and gentlemen. And also, of course, the one and only bearded fellow Popeye back with us here on a Freaky Friday where he belongs, and appreciate him chiming in. But I got to go on a tangent here, brother, because I think I just discovered something, and I think you guys are going to be really, really interested in this. So I was looking into this Charlie name, right? Watching a couple other things, looking around today, and somebody said, Charlie actually means something in Hebrew. And I thought, okay, let's go ahead and check that out. Okay, so the translation for Charlie into Hebrew is a word called Shamir, S-H-A-M-I-R, S-H-A-M-I-R. And when I went to look up what the Shamir was, this is what I discovered. It says the Shamir from Shamira in Aramaic means like a flint stone, and it was a supernatural organism. The word Shamir is biblical Hebrew and was used in two different senses. One was a pinpoint made out of a hard substance, and the other one was sharp thorns. So you can see how this is a pinpoint type of object here, right? And they say each usage relates to the ability of the Shamir to pierce hard surfaces. The glance of the supernatural Shamir could carve great stones, and the Talmud and later great rabbis described how the passage of the Shamir along the surface of a stone would cause it to split perfectly into two pieces. And what was this Shamir? Was it a mineral, a plant, or an animal? Well, in Abyssinian legend, the shamir was supposed to have been made of some kind of wood, and it was a crossed piece of wood that would indicate a point, right? So are we witnessing maybe here potentially some sort of Talmudic ritual here, guys?
Crossed pieces of wood. You mean like pencils?
I would think something real similar to pencils, Kevin. And I'm just wondering, again, with all of the intention that goes into the frequency of words these days, I just found that to be really, really interesting, especially given the fact that we're talking about the potential of piercing the veil right now, right? And they're talking about this shamir being used along the surface that would split a stone perfectly in two. That is exactly what these guys at CERN seem to be trying to doing, right? With this discovering of symmetry, supersymmetry, and all of that. And there's just something in here to me that seemed to be calling me out to just kind of bring you guys up to speed on what I just figured out. But what do you guys think of all of that? We'll go around the board. Let's start with Popeye because he's brand new to the crew here. What do you think of that, Pop?
Well, I think there's a lot to this whole thing. Okay, I just want to throw this out there really quick before we go any further, because people look at this like when you guys are bringing up Kali and Shiva, and everybody like freaks out when they hear Shiva. Now, it's important to understand that who Shiva is, the deity, but that doesn't mean like people need to like not put that energy of fear into this whole thing, and that's part of the problem with when we constantly talk about, oh, look at this esoteric symbol or this occult symbol or whatever. The uninitiated, and when I say uninitiated, I mean those who have not taken the time to do research. They react with fear because they don't understand it, and they think it's some oogity boogity thing. And then it's kind of like with Freemasonry. People only skim the very 1% top surface of it, think they know everything, and then run around making YouTube videos screaming, Shiva the Destroyer, or whatever, or Freemasons, or Illuminati, and they have no idea about what they're talking about. And all they're doing is pumping out actual more fear, that fear vibrational frequency. I wouldn't put that fear out when you're seeing things with like Shiva and stuff. Don't think that, oh my God, they're bringing about the end of the world. No, they very well could. Okay, don't think they couldn't, but don't put that energy or intent into it, because the powers that shouldn't be are the ones that believe in that, and they need your fear and you to believe in that as well to help empower what they're doing. So people shouldn't look at things like that and go, oh, go research who Shiva was. If you're a yogi and you've ever done yoga at all, you have to learn all about these different deities. You have to learn everything. It's a lot to do with energy. When you guys talk about intent, it's the energy we give off. Our bodies, our DNA, our little antenna, sending and receiving antenna. And we put off energy. We put off fear. And as long and difficult as this battle that we're all in is going to be, the last thing we need to be doing is pumping out that fear vibe constantly when looking into this. So when people hear Shiva or Kali or this or that, don't let your mind go, 1,000 miles a minute. And I'm just putting this out there. I'm not criticizing anybody. I'm just reminding everybody to not live in that vibrational frequency of fear when dealing with this. Just understand what these who these different deities are in whatever you want to call it. Religious belief, if you want to call it mythology, whatever. It doesn't matter if you believe in it or not. The people that are running things, they believe in it. Okay? So that's what you have to be aware of. But just don't pump that fear vibe into it. And interesting side note, Shiva is also used in pop culture. There's a very popular show called The League about fantasy football. Their trophy that they pass around each year and they vie for is called the Shiva, and it's named after some chick that they all wanted to get with in high school. And the word Shiva is said probably 5 to 10 times during each episode. So there's that. So again, yes, there is symbology. The people that run things, the powers that shouldn't be, they believe in a lot of this stuff, and their intent is to put it out there and then get you to believe in it via pop culture and everything else. You give up your own true power by putting your energy and fear into these symbols and into these deities that they want you to be afraid of and stuff. And that's what a lot of these dances and all this other crap at CERN is about. Just saying. So don't acquiesce. Don't give in to fear. Look into this stuff, but do so with logic and love. That's my take. Anyway, I hear the break music coming up, guys. So stay tuned. We'll be back in 3 short minutes, everyone. Woo! Hopefully hour 3 will go by with...
You're listening to the Truth Frequency Radio Network.
No hate, no hype, no fear.
Wanna know, are you true? Can you woo, 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 woo? They don't thug it like I do. Can you woo, 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 woo?
Real people, real radio. Wherever you are, make it TFR. Truth Frequency Radio.
And welcome back, folks. This is hour number 3 of the freakiest of Fridays, with all our connection problems thrown in to the absolutely brilliant information we're given about CERN. Now, we did throw a rope down the CERN hole. We caught Tony. We've dragged him back. And Tony, you were listening to that clip there about the Charlie game that is sweeping the planet right now, and the fact that they're crossing pencils, much in the way that they're crossing beams at CERN. Would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, I think you've made an excellent connection. And I think on a small scale, that's what's going on, that will be ramped up when they cross the beams. I think the crossing of the beams within the detectors is a large version, a much more powerful version of what's happening with Charlie. I think that this whole thing with Charlie, the timing of it, coincides with when they're going to actually start crossing the streams and colliding particles. That's supposed to happen during the first week, possibly second week of June, according to their last press release. It would appear, because of this manifestation of Charlie, that it's going to happen within a matter of a few days.
Wow, guys. Now, we're also joined tonight by Rebecca Roth. And Tony, you were saying there about them ramping up the speeds. And one particle collider that has been on the go for a while, because there's a lot of these things around the planet, is something that Rebecca really wants to ask you about. So, Rebecca, welcome to the Freaky Friday.
Well, thank you. I've been listening, and even I listened in this morning and becoming addicted to JD's show. My question really was partly because some people have contacted me that are scientists and kind of referring me to look at Brookhaven for some type of weapon possibly that was used on 9/11. And apparently that's another particle collider, and I think that's where they first found those ghost particles, or whatever they call them. They've been around for quite a long time. Yeah.
Strangelets.
Yeah, strangelets. So, do you know anything about any kind of weaponizing they could have done by 2001? It's just not something I'd ever looked at it till someone said they seemed to know more than they were telling me.
Sure. When 9/11 was taking place, the towers, we had a hurricane off the coast of the east coast of the United States. It had a modeled pathway in which it was going to travel right up along the east shoreline, but well offshore. At the time that the attacks occurred with the Twin Towers, the path of the hurricane deviated due west straight at New York. And then after the attacks concluded on the buildings, it resumed its original pathway offshore, heading north. So there has been some research, and I'm aware of what you're talking about, that at the time of the 9/11 attacks, the relativistic heavy ion collider, the RHIC, at Brookhaven Laboratories in Long Island, New York, not far from the Twin Towers, was up and running. Their superconducting magnets were activated. They were accelerating particles in a ring, just like they do with the LHC. And the theory is that a kinetic energy weapon, the accelerated particles, were released from the RHIC, from the circular ring, and directed towards the Twin Towers. Are you guys still there?
Yeah. I'm just front, and I'm putting pieces together as you're speaking. One of the things that inspired me to get my novel out was after speaking to a New York firefighter, and he told me that the bodies that they found from the guys that were up inside the buildings had actually been reduced to dust or nothing. I mean, they were gone. And that's very unusual to be able to do that to a human body. He found their gear, but no flesh and bones. So I'm thinking about what you're saying.
Well, let's go back to the German aircraft that was brought down in the Alps just recently, and the bodies also were described in a similar state of what you just described.
I hadn't heard that. I have kind of looking at that, but one of the things I found interesting about that crash was that there was clothing. I have some high-definition pictures that I pulled offline. Clothing out of people's luggage. I didn't see the luggage, but I saw bright-colored clothing, obviously not burned. The cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder are not 20 feet apart in the back tail section of the aircraft, yet one of them was smashed like it had been through some sort of smasher, like a garbage trash smasher, because those things don't really, they take a lot, because I know people that tested them. So, and then when they finally found the flight data recorder, which would have told us that the airplane had been turned off for some reason, maybe an electromagnetic impulse or something, that they showed it, and it was completely charred black. But I didn't see any other signs of fire anywhere. But when they showed us the flight data recorder, and they said, we'll probably never get anything out of this, of course, because they're covering up something. I couldn't tell if they were covering up maybe the use of a laser beam weapon that they're using now, because those are on planes now, chemical laser weapons, or maybe CERN had an effect from just what was going on there, because they were ramping CERN up pretty good, and they were bragging about it, and I was keeping track of it, and then boom, when that happened, they said that the co-pilot, you could hear him breathing. If you could hear somebody breathing on a cockpit voice recorder, you don't have any jets operating. You have nothing operating, no fans, no air conditioning, nothing, because that microphone is not right close to his mouth.
Mm-hmm. What was the state of the bodies? What was the condition of the bodies?
I didn't see any bodies, and I didn't really find any of that information in the stuff I was looking at.
It's the same conclusion I came to. Same conclusion. Some people have said maybe it was a directed energy weapon, much like a laser or chemical laser you mentioned, but this is more what I would describe as a kinetic energy weapon, which are accelerated particles using their speed and their innate energy, their kinetic energy, as the impact, not using explosives, but simply their speed and their mass impacting a target and causing a disintegration to take place. Now, there may be indications with that aircraft, as well as with the Twin Towers, that a kinetic energy weapon was used in both cases.
Yeah, that's amazing. Ugh. I guess we need more demons on our planet, huh? Open the portals.
It's funny too, because there's been other scientists, like I've had Dr. Judy Wood on the broadcast, and we've talked about how the buildings were actually pulverized as they were going down. The concrete was being actually pulverized and turned to powder.
I can't look. The 9/11 expert in me, I can't. I know if there's a possibility. I don't discount anything, but it was explosives that took the buildings down. I don't think
totally, dude, totally. But think about it.
I'm just saying the reason I say that. The only reason I say that is because she herself, and I will say this. You guys don't have to say it. I'll be the one that say that and takes the heat for it. Judy Wood is disinfo. As far as I'm concerned, she's disinfo. And there's plenty of reasons why I could say that. I'm not going to bash her. I'm just saying. Now, the other idea that they could have used some sort of weird weapons that we don't know about, totally plausible. But
think about this.
In her theory, and you know why, Joe.
Oh, no, I know. I totally know why. But think about this, because this gives credence to the Brookhaven thing and everything else. Whenever you do a demolition and you look at a demolition, you always have very large chunks of debris left. But in this case, there wasn't many big chunks of debris left because it had already disintegrated by the time it got to the bottom.
there was a lot
so
of.
What I'm saying is, if it's a combination of technologies, you could have a lot of things in play there.
There was a lot of debris left, more than what you realize.
Oh, sure, of course.
Look, the concrete was turned into talcum powder. Okay, something Rebecca and I actually discussed this last night when we were talking about 9/11. Whatever they used, it was a combination of conventional explosives, thermite, and I think at least Reconnaissance barometric bomb, if not something, like a newer version of that.
Right.
You need the brisance, that shattering power to turn. You have,
wait a minute. What was that word again?
It's called brisance.
Brisance. Can you spell that? Yeah, I'm going to use that a lot now. How do you spell that?
Yeah, it's Google it. Just
you just words.
My parents used to do that to me. Just look it up in the dictionary. If I can't spell it, how am I going to Google it, Popeye? Come on.
B-R. Anyway, the shattering power that you would require, the pressure that would be needed to turn poured concrete. I'm not talking like cement. I'm talking, poured concrete, cured like solid concrete into talcum powder fine like dust, like flour. You need like super high amounts of pressure, and in order to vaporize the bodies, like we were talking about last night, Rebecca, you need pressure and heat. And you could see the squib, so I totally think explosives are used. I'm just saying that
Squibs, for sure. Yeah, there's no doubt.
I don't buy the whole Judy Wood thing, but actually, you guys bring up Tony brings up something very interesting, and so does Rebecca. Hurricane Aaron. Now, this is like a pet peeve of mine because I've talked about this, and people have told me, oh, you're crazy, there was no hurricane offshore. Really? I made a documentary about it. And if you go watch the documentary I made like 3 years ago, I put satellite photos of Hurricane Aaron in it. And I zoomed in on the photo, and you can see the outer bands were right outside of Long Island. So you tell me how come there was not one, and then I went and I took the news reports from that day, and I showed you the news reports, and they were like, oh, that hurricane, that's going away. And then I compared it to news reports when hurricanes were inbound or just skimming by the coast, not making a direct line for New York. And there was all sorts of coverage and screaming and yelling and freaking out, but not on 9/11. Surprisingly, it's a sunny day. It's a beautiful day. Nothing to worry about. How the hell did the meteorologists know that Category 3, a Category 3 hurricane, not a little tiny Category 1 or a tropical storm, a Category 3 monster storm was bearing down on New York? And like Tony said, and I actually found the satellite footage from NOAA, and it's in the documentary, you see the hurricane making its way towards New York, when all of a sudden this high-pressure ridge comes in. Oh, and what can they do with things like HAARP? Oh, they can create high-pressure domes, and they can move them around, and they can bounce hurricanes around, like you do.
Oh, yeah.
Ball machine. Oh, and they can also move the jet stream. So every time you hear the polar vortex, it's weird. Must be climate change.
See? Now you're talking my music here, some polar vortex in September. And these are two very important topics that we have to get to because, Tony, there's some crazy things happening in September. Like, what's going to happen when it's ions of lead instead of ions? What are they using right now? Hydrogen?
Protons.
Or protons?
They're using protons against protons. They're going to use ions of lead, which are much denser, and so when they collide,
right?
Remember we talked about taking protons and multiplying their mass by 14,000. Now you take a resting mass particle that's much denser and accelerate it and raise its mass 14,000 times, you get a lot more power. They talk about 14 tera electron volts being the maximum sustained power that the magnets, remember the steering magnets, the superconducting magnets can handle. However, I think they're going to go beyond 14. They could potentially go to 17 or 20 with the lead ion particles. That starts in September all the way through to just before Christmas. Their published schedule indicates these collisions of lead particles. So September's got a lot of things coming together.
Now, that's also, of course, the Day of Atonement. And there's
23rd.
Yeah, which just so happens, isn't that the first day of live testing?
No, it'll happen earlier in September, but all the way through September, October, November, and part of December.
So it's just going to be, going to be full on then.
Right. It's going to be full on then. We got the Pope coming to the United States. We've got the blood moon. We got a lot of things coming together in September.
Wow. Tell you, September's just one of those crazy months, especially 9/11. So much has happened on 9/11 and so many things. And then we have that close asteroid, says Whistles. Is that right? The 23rd of September? We have an asteroid pass?
Yeah, this is one that's going to be really close. And the thing with that CERN up at full power, just wondered if it's maybe changed the course of this thing as well. So, you never know, Joe.
Wow. Could you imagine them steering a friggin' asteroid with CERN?
Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
if you consider that electric currents exist throughout the universe, and therefore electromagnetic energy, magnets, if you will, exist between heavenly bodies. And if we're talking about magnets superconducting plus the magnetic lines of force I said earlier that are generated by the rotation, the acceleration and rotation of these particles, plus the fact that they're changing the shape of our shields, the magnetosphere,
right?
You could say potentially they could attract, they could change the trajectory of this. However, what I think, if you've got a close approach, if you open the shields, you essentially have the ability to have this thing have a greater effect upon us just because of the close approach. Let me describe why. This is really critical. Think about Jupiter when we had impacts on Jupiter. Just before those impacts took place, the shattering of the impact, there were plasma discharges that took place between the asteroid and the surface of the planet before the impact. This is what happens when comets and asteroids approach a larger body in space. Before impact, there is a discharge, just like an arc welder, that takes place between those bodies because you have a change in the charges between, the charge potential changes. And this gets into the capacitance of the surface of the asteroid and other things. If you have a close approach and you drop the shields, you now have the ability for an electric discharge to take place between that asteroid or comet and the Earth itself.
Wow. Now, I'm speculating here, but I'm taking it you're thinking that September is the window for when they're actually going to try and reconnect via plasma the connection to Saturn. Would that be correct?
That's right. And if you look at the spirals that we've seen over Norway, the jellyfish one just recently, and we look at the spiral that's at the south pole of Saturn, they're all the same. Those are plasma spirals. Those are Birkeland currents in the shape of a plasma spiral.
Of course, this is the same thing we've seen painted on the walls of caves back in the day, guys, that looked like a wheel with spokes on it. This is the kind of things that we're going to be seeing in the sky again. And really, I mean, they talk about signs in the heavens, and then they talk about there'll be signs on the earth as well. And Popeye, you were talking about all the earthquakes and things like that. Definitely interesting times, man.
Well, it makes you wonder if them playing... I was listening to you guys earlier when I was at the gym the first hour, and Tony really had my attention when he said that, like, there's a connection between CERN and all these earthquakes. It just makes you wonder, like, we already know that the Earth is, moving. And I don't think every earthquake or every volcano is connected to this thing, but it makes you wonder that if this uptick in activity is because they're playing with it at the same time, and then they're shooting this energy into the Earth. And who knows what the hell could, like, here's a question, Tony. Could them messing with CERN, because if we believe that the Earth, the Earth's core is this molten ball of metal that's spinning and it's, creating this electromagnetic energy that's emanating from it, could we screw with the engine of the Earth, the core of the planet? Could we end up, like, stopping the core by messing with CERN?
Like those jets stopped?
Yeah, I mean, could that technically be, or theoretically be, a possibility?
I don't think they have the magnetic lines of force, the magnetic energy to be able to affect the spin of the core. Part of it is the distance, the other is just the mass of the core itself. I don't think that it really has any effect on that. If we buy into the theory of strangelets and strangelets plummeting to the core of the planet and then converting matter, then we can see some behavior changes in the core itself. But in terms of the magnets and the magnetic lines of force generated by the acceleration of particles, no, I don't think it's really capable of reaching the core. It's the crust and the mantle that they're affecting by the telluric waves that are being generated from the Earth by CERN, bouncing off the magnetosphere back to the crust and causing gravimetric waves to propagate, to flow across the crust and through the mantle of the Earth. And thereby, I think, triggering those already pre-existing weak spots in the tectonic areas that trigger things like Nepal.
That's really frightening to think that. Do you think that they realize that they're doing that, or it's like an unintended consequence and they really don't care?
Well, it's a side effect. Much like a drug that you take, you have a side effect that you know that's going to occur, but you're looking for the cure. Their cure is that they need to reconnect the planets, and there's a whole spiritual aspect we haven't even touched on as to why they want to use the physics to connect to the planets. And this goes all the way back to the myths and the ancient legends and the ancient drawings and writings and manuscripts that talk about the spiritual aspects that are connected with the physics that we started this whole show with, that you cannot separate the two. Physics and the spiritual world are one and the same. They're just using a large tool to recreate what they were able to achieve in the ancient times using spiritual energy and spiritual incantations in order to open dimensional portals. Now we have to have a machine to do it because they've lost the capabilities that they had in the ancient times, and I'll stop there.
I really wonder what they're trying to achieve. I don't think, maybe they are trying to bring some interdimensional army through, but I really think that CERN itself, because the shape of it, you guys were talking earlier, again, when I was listening, it made me think, the shape of it being a circle, and, Joe brought up how they've got this electromagnetic field supposedly keeping everything in. Well, to me, that's all I see is that this thing's a doorway, like a mini Stargate or something, or they're trying to create a Stargate of sorts. Because if you're going to penetrate a wall, the easiest way to do it, like a doorway, why don't when SWAT teams come up to your front door, why don't they just throw their bodies and hurl their bodies against the door like an idiot? Because they realize that by throwing all of that force against the entire door itself, it's spread out. So they use a battering ram with maybe a 4 or 5 inch head, and all of that force is concentrated in a smaller area. Well, same thing goes for if you're trying to penetrate, the veil between the third and fourth dimensions. And mainstream science admits that the fourth dimension exists. And supposedly, if you want to go down the woo hole and you believe in reptilians and all that, right, they supposedly exist in the fourth dimension. So who's to say that they're not using CERN to concentrate all of this energy and, you concentrate it in a pinhole-sized spot that maybe they can literally rip a hole in between the third and fourth dimension. And then they'll try to figure out, obviously, how to expand that hole. And then the question is, do they even know how to stop the expansion of it and control it, and then control things from coming through? What kind of effects is that going to have here on this dimension? What kind of effects would it have on the other side? Would it merge the two? Would there be leak over? What kind of chaos would it create? It just opens up Pandora's box. But these are the same type of people that when they tested the nukes out in New Mexico, they were like, hey, we might destroy the planet, but let's press that red button anyway. Boop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, a combination. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I find it really interesting with this Callie and Charlie thing that a few months back in Paris, we had people, and immediately, if you'll notice, kind of like the flags on 9/11, like they knew it was going to happen, immediately people were carrying this I am Charlie sign. They had signs all over, I am Charlie, I am Charlie. And so for about, 3 or 4 months, we've been kind of pre-programmed with I Am Charlie. And now we've got these kids doing the Charlie Charlie Challenge, and it's really set up on a micro scale where they're actually kind of building a little CERN thing and then driving this energy into it. And some kids might be doing it as a game, but when the Catholic Church comes out and realizes that you can pull in a demon and they'll get stuck in you if you don't get rid of them, and it's not something to play with, and it really is kind of dangerous on a spiritual level. And so you've got a lot of kids through Twitter and stuff, this social media, they're all doing this Charlie thing too. And Cali, what struck me was California, because we've got somebody out there saying there's going to be a 9-point earthquake in California. And so I'm thinking, wow, this is just all really connected in a weird way with the words we hear from the media. Just the same, all those words have a meaning, like Callie and Charlie and
magical
spells. Let's go back. Those are spells. Yeah, those are spells. But going back to the pencils and the pencil point, and your comment about concentrating the energy into a small pinpoint to open a portal, that's what the collimators do. I mentioned the collimators earlier are squeezing down the beam into a very fine point. And then they're going to use lead ions in that fine point. What is a pencil made of? Pencil lead.
Lead. Oh, yeah.
It's actually graphite, but we call it lead, right? So now we're using lead ions to create a very small pencil point that's 1 million times smaller than a human hair. A lot of power behind it.
And there we are, folks. We're right up on the break, and we'll be back to the last section of Freaky Friday right after these messages. Please don't go anywhere. Right up after this show, it is the Geos with Truth Frequency. Please don't go anywhere.
This is Truth Frequency Radio.
No hate, no hype, no fear. Real people, real radio.
Welcome back to the Freaky Friday, folks. With me, your host, Kev Baker, and of course the other hosts on the Woo crew. We've got Joe Joseph, Johnny Whistles, Big Marty is back with us. We've got JD Moore. We've also got Popeye, Rebecca Roth, and the one and only Mr. Anthony Patch. Now, before the break, we were getting into the Uber Woo. And, just during the break, Popeye, going back to something we spoke about earlier on, and that was the number 8. Could you tell the audience about the number 8?
It's symbolic for Saturn. So you guys were talking about Saturn and all this Saturnian stuff, and this symbolism, and then the number 8 being all over the place. And I had my earphones on, and I'm in the gym screaming, "It's a cult!" people are looking at me like I had 6 heads, but I didn't realize I was I was kind of saying it a little bit out loud. Look, you have to research this stuff, ladies and gentlemen. You have to read. And when I say like research, I don't mean going online. You have to try to find older books, like on occult theocracy, and you have to do your research, even if you don't believe in it. Like everybody has said tonight, and Tony has repeatedly said this, and he is on point. This is spiritual. This is much deeper than you understand. This isn't just this physical thing that we've, the woo, the science, the woo. It really does go much deeper. Joe said it too. So did Rebecca. So did Kevin. JD. This is very spiritual, without a shadow of a doubt. And it's their beliefs. It doesn't matter if you believe in this stuff. Just like I said earlier. It doesn't matter if I believe in it, if Rebecca believes in it, if Tony believes in it. It doesn't matter if any of us believe in it. These psychos believe in this stuff. So we have to understand what they believe in order to at least understand what the hell they're trying to do. Now,
exactly.
Do I know why they're trying to bounce signals out to Saturn? No. Actually, Tony would probably know better than that. I know that there's some sort of spiritual connection as to why they're trying to line all the planets up. Right, Tony?
Yeah, and the best that I can determine at this point, and I've had a lot of help in the research in this area from Chris and Tim from End Times Matrix News. I mean, we've got about 40 hours of stuff recorded on my website and their website. What it comes down to is this. There are indications from the ancient studies that there are spiritual entities. Some people want to call it the original 7 fallen angels, but there are spiritual entities residing within Saturn itself. And this sounds totally bizarre, But you put it very well. We have to understand what they believe. This isn't what I believe. But they say that there are entities within Saturn that they need to release, and they need to have a plasma conduit, the Birkeland currents, to transport those spirits to Earth. They are going to come along the pathway of the Birkeland currents from the southern pole of Saturn, when the connection is made, to the moon, from the moon through the torus, and the torus is the gateway. That's the portal, the hole in the donut, that punching through with that pinpoint beam that we're talking about, the pencil beam, the lead beam, pencil point. That is going to be at the center point of the hole of the torus. That torus forms the portal through which these entities from Saturn will then continue along the Birkeland currents that pass through the hole of the donut, the torus, from the moon, through the torus, to the Earth, to the abyss. And CERN is positioned over the abyss, over the ancient temple, Roman temple of Apollyon, Apollo. That is there to open the abyss once these entities join forces with the pre-existing entities that are already in the abyss. And the whole point is to kill God. They need an army to kill God and his angels. Satan, in his hubris, believes that he can actually kill God. That's what they believe. It's not me. I'm just reflecting what they say.
Really good points made there, guys.
Tony, could I ask you a question? This Taurus, is there a place on planet Earth where that is going to be pinpointed in, where they'll come into? Will they come in through Jerusalem? Is there a vortex at the Mecca where the black cube is, or do you know?
Well, we talk about the Gulf of Aman. We talk about Yemen. We talk about places in Iraq where supposedly there are already existing or perhaps ancient stargates. Now, if you look in Jerusalem at the Dome of the Rock, I'm not focusing on Mecca and the Black Cube, but on the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. That dome sits atop an 8-sided building, an octagon. And within that building is the stone that has a hole in it called the navel of the universe. And that is a hole that was produced by the removal of one stone. And through that hole, you pass into the well of souls. I believe that there will be an alignment of that hole with this Taurus and the moon and Saturn that will all align, and that will be connected through the Birkeland currents to the Well of Souls and will play a part in CERN's location over the abyss. And so they will all play a part in opening the abyss in the end times.
Wow, and it's funny, Tony, that you should mention the abyss and stuff there, because according to the Talmud, the word of the Talmud, not my word sort of thing, there's actually 3 gates to hell, one being in the ocean, one being in the desert, and the other being in Jerusalem. So that makes you wonder when they're talking about this digging under the rock thing, and yeah.
Exactly.
Here's the thing, though. When you look at where the problem, like when you're talking about the Temple Mount, Marty, is that where they're digging? Or are you talking about in Egypt?
Yeah, I'm talking about Jerusalem. There's allegedly digging under Al-Aqsa and the Temple Mount, and there's a lot of stuff going on under there.
It's interesting because that's Fortress Antonia. It's a Roman fortress. It's not even the Temple Mount. That's the problem. See, that's the issue, is when you look at the true history, and Josephus wrote about this extensively, the temple, some of the landmarks around there, one of them was Mount Zion. Well, after the Romans took Jerusalem again, 70 AD, the emperor at the time, decided, you know what? We're going to destroy the temple. We're not going to leave any part of it left. No, we're even going to take Mount Zion and we're going to level it. So Mount Zion gone. They changed the entire landscape of Jerusalem. The Jerusalem that everybody knows as like the, well, this is where Jesus walked and all that. It's not the same. It's totally different, and so I'm telling you, you guys are right in that there's some things that are going on in parallel, not only with CERN, but things going on in Jerusalem. But it's away from the Temple Mount that you should be concerned about. And I think it's like, I can't remember how many yards down, but there was an actual, there was a the temple and Fortress Antonia was separated by a walkway, a 2-tiered walkway. Just a fascinating stuff when you get into Josephus's work about that. And he actually witnessed it in the day, very interesting. Just had to throw my 2 cents in on that. In the days of Noah.
What about Mount Hermon? Continue your discussion.
The Mount Hermon connection. Yes. Oh, Tony, I mean, that's a whole show.
Okay. Give us the basics, Joe, for heathens like me.
Well, now Mount Hermon, they say, is a Stargate.
Mm-hmm. Whoa, another Stargate?
Another Stargate, yeah. That's gosh, who's a good, we got to get Rob Skiba on to talk about that with, about the Mount Hermon connection.
What is it about deserts? Can I just ask this question? And I say this because just coming back from a road trip, I can attest, and if Christina were here, she'd be able to attest to this too. There's something about the desert and energy. Because when I was out in Arizona and when I was out in New Mexico, I said to her,
gosh, it's hot out here.
Well, besides that, I said, I kind of get why they do things out in the desert. It's like, there's this weird energy out there. I don't know how else to describe it other than if you've ever been out in like Nowheresville, New Mexico, or Nowheresville, Arizona, and been by just out in the desert itself and looked at some of these mesas, these flat top, huge mesas where you could picture something landing on top of. I mean, we saw some, it was like, that thing looks like a spaceship landing pad. And you understand when you look around and you just feel the energy emanating, the natural energy, I guess. I don't know what else to call it. It's just like
radiation.
Well, that too. That's the added stuff from all the atomic testing and leaking plants and leaking storage sites. But what is it about the desert? Like, I mean, Tony, Rebecca, JD, anyone have any idea maybe why that, like, it has that vibe that maybe would be conducive to this type of thing?
The sand grains maybe have some kind of quartz or some quality, maybe, Tony?
Well, if we look at the pyramids themselves as an example, of course, those are in the desert as well. The pyramids were covered in limestone, but the actual structure is granite, and granite is moderately conductive. And we had basically in the Golden Age, what I was talking about during the 4th dynasty in Egypt, all of Egypt was electrified. They had electrical current between the buildings, and also within the pyramid itself, you had electric current that was passing from the base inside the pyramid right up through the peak of the pyramid. And we no longer have the capstone, but there's theories that the capstone was a gemstone like a diamond, or perhaps it was just gold. But the point is it was I don't want to say a directed energy weapon, but it's akin to that in the fact that it is conductive on its interior, and they had electricity at that time. Now, to answer your question about why does the desert seem to have more energy, I can't really answer that. I can't give you a specific.
I'll take a crack at that. You just got my brain spinning. And I, like you, I've spent some time out in Flagstaff and the Sedona area, and there is a palpable energy in the air. And, Pop, one of the things I was thinking was that, that desert area hasn't always been a desert area. A lot of those areas were forests and, underwater, even oceans. So maybe that there's been a significant loss of the spark of life in that area, and some of that might be residually hanging on now. Maybe, when you see those, anytime you have a really drastic transition in any type of physical area, you see energy change shapes and change forms in different manners. The same way, like, if you try and make a tray of ice, it will freeze faster if it's really hot water versus really cold water. For some reason, I don't know why, maybe Tony knows why, it makes an ice cube quicker. So potentially there's some energy left in maybe that transitional state between forestry and whatever's left? What do you think?
It's spiritual. I can tell you that. Like you could feel it. If you know what I'm talking about. You felt it.
I've been out to those points in Sedona where I went out there specifically to try and find some of those focal points of energy when I was on a big long Harley Davidson ride with my dad. Man, we did that on purpose, and it was palpable, and it was a moment for sure.
And we were where I was right outside of Sedona, and that whole area. Put all the nuke testing and all that stuff aside. There was something you could. Like I said earlier, and I know I'm sure Tony knows this. Our DNA is antenna, sending and receiving, and it was like there's certain areas that it's like your DNA, your antenna would just light up.
Mm-hmm. I lived in South Lake Tahoe, and I've experienced that out there as well. South Lake Tahoe, for some reason, in California on the Nevada border, has got a really, really deep, rich energy pool for some reason.
Well, if we look at ley lines and the crossing of ley lines, we have the concentration of magnetic energy at those crossings. We're talking about CERN crossing. But the same thing happens when you're crossing current. You take two electrical wires, and they are positive and negative, and you cross them over, and you form a twisted helix, which is what the Birkeland current, just like DNA, is shaped just like DNA. What I think you're describing when you say going to points are the concentrations of magnetic lines of force in the desert itself. Now, sand and the heat, you can get a lot of static electricity that builds up because of that. That may be part of it. But I think specifically when you talk about points, you're talking about concentrations of magnetic lines of force.
And of course, Tony, it could be all coincidence, yeah, right. But of course, CERN near Geneva, Lake Geneva, just happens to have 24 ley lines coming out of it. It is an absolutely active point, and I don't think it's any coincidence whatsoever that we see them putting that there.
Well, I agree with you. So think about it in the reverse. We're thinking about ley lines, and we're talking about bringing those lines of magnetic force together into a point. Reverse that process and go from the point out around the globe. And that gives you the lines, the transmission lines of the gravimetric waves moving out around the planet and affecting the tectonic plates. So those are all pathways. Everything is electrically connected. Our DNA, just like you said about it, our antenna, our mitochondria, everything is electrically connected all the way out to the macrosphere. And so it's easy to see that the magnets at CERN, the magnetic lines of force, can transmit all the way around the planet utilizing the ley lines.
And Tony, we're having to deal with this new electrical model now. Now, I like my physics, and I've always been used to this Einsteinian kind of model, the gravity kind of thing. How does gravity fit with the electrical model?
Well,
or
gravity,
does it?
Well, it does, but it's extremely weak in comparison. And remember, I gave you the example of holding a magnet and lifting a steel ball off of the planet Earth, because magnetic forces are tremendously more powerful than gravimetric. So when you're talking about a gravity model, the gravity of the sun, for example, supposedly holding the planets, even all the way out to Pluto, in their orbits, doesn't fit. What holds them in their orbit is the magnetic attraction of the sun, because all of the planets are connected to the sun electrically. Thus, if you have the electrical connections, you also have magnetic lines of force connecting the planets to the sun. So the magnetic lines of force, being much more powerful than gravity, is what holds the planets in their orbital pathways, not gravity.
Oh, absolutely fantastic, Tony. It's also believed as well that there's a ley line from the Great Pyramid that runs right up through Rome, via CERN, and to Stonehenge and beyond, in a straight line. So you really You couldn't make this stuff up. There seems to be
Yeah, I saw that. And it's fascinating. And Stonehenge is a circle.
Yeah. It does explain some kind of complexity when you look at this Earth energy grid. You actually see it, and you see these lines that just go around the world. And then, of course, you have the 12 vile vorticles as well, in which you have like the Bermuda Triangle, Devil's Triangle, and the 10 others. And that's where you have these anomalies of ships and planes disappearing and all kinds of stuff.
Of course, we have the...
On you go,
ahead.
Tony.
Well, just real quickly, off of Japan, we have the equivalent of the Bermuda Triangle just off the coast of Japan.
Yeah, I believe that one's called the Dragon's Triangle, isn't it?
Yeah, and they have crystal pyramids under the water that are larger than the pyramids of Egypt.
Wow, Popeye, you want to jump in here, man?
Well, I was just going to say, Tony mentioned the macro, and he said, out into the macro, and you're just very on point, Tony, as always. What I just wanted to throw in my 2 cents. It's the law of correspondence. You hear again, when people they look in the Freemasonry, they only like the top 1%, and they'll go, "Oh, the Freemasons' motto is as above, so below." It's not their motto; that they just kind of borrowed it. It's called the law of correspondence, and it's what we talk about all the time. When I talk about changing, when I do like the really emotionally hard-hitting shows like about my PTS or anything, and I talk about changing, and I say before you can go out and save the world, you have to change and fix yourself first. In the micro, yourself, out into the macro, which is the law of correspondence. And it exactly fits this too. If they're dicking with CERN, and they're, what they do on the small scale with CERN goes out into the rest of the world. Micro,
yes, it does.
Macro. So I just wanted to throw my 2 cents in there.
No, you're exactly right, and it reaches right out to the sun and to the planets. Again, it's just all a matter of electrical pathways. And so when people talk about in the New Age sense of we're all connected, we're all one, or in any of your religions when we talk about we're one, well, quite literally we are, because we are immersed in plasma. And that can be measured. As I said earlier today, you can measure and quantify and reproduce plasma. You cannot do that with dark matter and dark energy, which is all theoretical, and that ties into black holes and wormholes. Forget about black holes. Kev, you were talking about, Einstein and all the stuff you learned in school. Forget about all of the Einstein models. Forget about black holes and wormholes. They cannot be proven. They cannot be reproduced. They cannot be measured. It's purely on the chalkboard. Everything is electrical. And when you talk about black holes in the cosmos, and you look at these two opposing jets of energy that stream out from the core of what is supposed to be a black hole, a dense gravimetrically concentrated form of matter, you're actually looking at a concentration of plasma. Remember I talked about the donut, the torus, generating two opposing streams of energy. That's what's happening in the cosmos. And in the gravity model with Einstein, they want to say it's a black hole. It's not. It's a concentration of plasma generating exactly the same synchrotron energies in those two opposing jets that is created with a synchrotron particle accelerator on the Earth, no matter what size. And CERN, being the biggest, is generating the largest jets of synchrotron energies moving outward into the universe. And the opposing one, and you guys were talking about the core earlier, the opposing one penetrates the crust, the mantle, and to the core. So you have two lines of energy moving in two opposite directions out of CERN when they collide particles.
Wow, and when we're talking about these black holes then, since we can't actually measure them, they really are, they go from the theoretical and scientific into the more philosophical. And that kind of figures, guys, because they will want to cover up the true nature of the universe. Because this takes us back to Tesla, and he had sussed it. And he told us once we figured out the numbers 3, 6, and 9 and got our head around the electric universe, we would have the key to free energy. And that is one
one change that would actually make a paradigm shift overnight. And Joe opened up the show talking about the conspiracy theorists and how we're all idiots. And they actually try to say in that we bring up free energy devices every day. And they make out as if that's some kind of absolute lie. Yet these free energy devices have been going on the go for absolutely years, Popeye.
Well, you can't have free energy. And, Tesla did talk about like pulling energy from the ether. Kind of makes you what exactly really it is. What are we? What kind of energy is it? And how come it hasn't been focused on? Maybe it has been focused on. You just don't know about it. How about that?
And Tony, you described the Earth as like a battery earlier on. And JD's put in the chat there that we could even be looking at the Earth as a free energy device. That's not too far from the truth, is it?
Well, that's true. Back in the 1840s, they actually used the 1 volt of electricity that they could tap from the Earth to run telegraph systems. Now, you can get a lot more than 1 volt out of the Earth. It's a matter of spacing your 2 electrodes that you put into the Earth, into wet Earth. The farther apart those electrodes are, the higher the current that you can generate from the Earth itself. That is passive generation by the Earth of electricity. And the ether that Tesla talked about is the plasma that I talked about that exists in the vacuum of space and all around us today.
Wow. There you go, guys. Almost out of time. Now, Tony, where can people find your work and your books?
Yeah, AnthonyPatch.com. AnthonyPatch.com has on the homepage information about CERN. It has schedules for CERN, and also you can purchase my books if you care to. Right now, I'm only offering the books for sale. They're just $5 a piece, and a science companion write-up for $2. So it's very moderately priced. They're just novels that take a lot of what we've talked about and put it in hopefully an interesting story format.
And when are you going to be appearing next on the absolutely brilliant YouTube channel that is End Times Matrix News? The work that you guys and girls do over there, it really is. It's priceless, Tony.
It really is, and especially Chris is just phenomenal in her studies of the ancients. She just makes connections that are just amazing, and they're right on and they're factual. I'll be on every Thursday. We do a Google Hangout every Thursday. We start at 11 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, and we usually run an hour to an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours. And I usually give Chris the floor because she's got all the new discoveries. A lot of what I talked about today as far as ancient studies information, like the navel at the Well of Souls beneath the Dome of the Rock, comes right from Chris's work. So we've got, 40, 50 hours of stuff that we've talked about, much deeper than what we're talking about here as it relates to the ancients.
And I think it's a really good companion show to run alongside the archive of this and the other CERN work that we've put out there, guys. But there is the music. It is the end of yet another Freaky Friday. The Geos are coming up right after the break.